topics faith, family and freedom in Cuba, Belgium, Brazil, Congo, UK and all over the USA to crowds from 14 to 40,000. International leadership speaker, trainer and coach. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of Story Power TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders Podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet Television as well as multiple social media channels. Please help me welcome J. Loren Norris.
It's pretty fascinating as a leader when you walk from one room to the next. And maybe that room isn't like several rooms in a building, like it does happen in a conference or something of that nature. You walk from one room to the next, and in one room they're talking to broadcasters. In another room you're talking to content creators or scriptwriters or authors. And as you move from one room to the other, the conversation changes. And if you're not careful as a leader, you take the same conversation from one room to the next. I'm not sure that bodes well for the diversity of leadership that people expect from you. That's what I want to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. I'm J. Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and over the last couple of weeks I've had a chance to venture out into some completely different arenas. The week before last, I drove to Orlando and back with a guy who has created a television network, a global television network, and making deals for satellite distribution and cable distribution and local channel distribution and expanding onto other networks and more exposure on OTT platforms, i.e. your Roku and Kindle, Spectrum, things of that nature. All of these elements of the adventure are necessary in the background in order to have success in growing a network. Well, now the next step is you've got to bring in all the content providers, finding the people who are actually going to provide the shows, provide what you're going to air, whether those are talking heads like this show, or they are conversations like your typical interview show, or they are daily programs that entertain a whole lot of different ideas. And building that platform means talking to a lot of different people with different experiences, people who've been in broadcast forever and ever and ever. Now, this is a guy who came from another country. 20 years ago, he came here from Uganda. And now he's building something vast right here in the U.S. We could spend a week talking about what opportunity looks like when you're willing to pursue it. We could spend hours discussing the fortitude that it takes, the courage it takes to be able to say, right now I got nothing. I'm starting with nothing. I don't have $10 billion in the bank. I don't have the amount of money that maybe the Murdochs had when they launched their adventure, or Disney ABC had when they launched their venture, or CNN had when they launched their venture. We're talking about somebody who's bootstrapping it from the very beginning, selling stuff off at the pawn shop to come up with the money to make the trips, to make the contacts. But now it's coming to fruition. I've known this guy for almost 12 years personally. We spent a whole lot of time together at coffee, chatting, spending time together at lunch, and then we drove to Orlando and back. But the diversity necessary from leadership conversations, walking from one room to the next, sitting down with one group who has 60 million subscribers on their online channel, to another that has 45 television stations and networks, and we want to get on their platform, to another who is nothing but satellite all over the Middle East and Africa. And each of those conversations is a little bit different. What they have to offer, what we have to offer, what they want from us, what we want from them. That seems like a pretty standard thing, right? Like a salesperson might do. But I had the opportunity this last week to go to an event where I was on stage a couple of times, but it wasn't as a speaker. I got to watch a lot of fascinating speakers, keynote speakers, people selling their products and services, people telling about their story and why did they end up as a part of this group. And I got to watch some very fascinating people and some in this category, heavy hitters, people that if you're in this world, you know them by name. And I was privileged to have the opportunity to interview them behind the scenes. And so if you've been following my Facebook, you've seen some of the photographs of me interviewing Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, Chad Prather, who's a comedian and a spokesperson. He's on another network. Bobby Sausalito, they call him Bobby Sauce. Josh Fernstein, Dr. Maria Cosgrove. These are some people who have done some significant things. I got to sit down with a guy who's a 2-time Gold Star family, meaning he's lost 2 different people from his family to war. He's a veteran himself. These are fascinating people, and you learn a lot about who they are and the journey that they've been on. Here's something that I want to recommend, though. As a leader, it's really easy to get caught up in what you know. Really easy to get caught up in what brought you to the room or brought you to the table or made the conversation worthwhile for you. And the challenge in a lot of those environments is it's not about you. As a leader, you've got to be willing to have those conversations in a way that people acknowledge you've come to the table with some curiosity, and you've come to the table, literally to the table, maybe with a microphone in front of you and a camera on the other side of that microphone, or maybe it's just at the coffee shop or the lunch table or over a desk during an employee review. You've come to the table with more curiosity than command. Let that settle in for a second. I want you as a leader to challenge yourself to focus more on curiosity than command. Less about you being right, being in charge, taking over the conversation, taking over the relationship, demanding the outcome, and more about you finding out who these other people are. Who are they? Why does it matter? What's the big deal, so to speak? What's the big deal, not about you, but about them? What have they discovered? Now, I'll tell you, sometimes as the interviewer, you've got to be ready to ask questions that are a little bit tough. Sometimes you've got to be willing to just listen to answers that seem to drone on. And you will find that as you interview people, one of the guys that I talked to is a researcher. He had a lot to say, had a lot of information. We only had a 10-minute interview window. I could talk to this guy for probably 3 days because his mind is like my bookshelves, always full of new stuff, always pushing the edge of the envelope of understanding. And I really appreciate someone who has that much to offer and has focused their attention of research in one area, as Chad Jackson has done. Very impressive amount of knowledge, very deep focus in the area of his interests and his concerns. As a leader, you've got to be a listener. And sometimes somebody's going to flip the script on you. They're going to turn the camera around the other way. They're going to want to know what you know. And I'm going to tell you, even then, even if you're the interview guest, even if you have, as it would, all the information and all the answers, the humility and the grace that I saw from some of the more seasoned speakers who had a conversation with me rather than I ask one question and they fill the rest of the time answering that question because they feel like they've got to dump their knowledge out there. Not that that's a bad thing in every environment, but for the sake of a good conversation, it's always best to listen more than you talk. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, obviously a very accomplished man. He has held office at a state level. He has run for office at a national level. He's been a field commander of massive amounts of troops in a time of war. He's been on the battlefield, literally in a combat zone. He's also been on the battlefield of ideas looking to see what can be done to change the way our nation is functioning. And if you believe a lot of what he says, it's dysfunctional right now on a lot of levels. So when you have somebody who has that much accomplishment under their belt and that much experience under their belt and that much seniority, so to speak, it's hard sometimes to feel like you're adequate to have a conversation with them, but Colonel Allen West does a really good job of making that conversation amicable, peaceable, intriguing, worthwhile, regardless of who's on the other side of that conversation. That's my challenge to you as leaders. Are you the kind of person who can have a brilliant conversation in one room to the next, from a group of broadcasters and television people, content creators and antenna distributors, all the way down to the everyday person who's just stopping for a cup of coffee but wants somebody to chat with? Oh, it happens to me all the time. I'll be sitting in a coffee shop with a book that I'm reading or studying for the next event, and someone will walk up and just sit down with their coffee. And most of the time, I will close my book and have whatever conversation they want to have. I'm going to challenge you as leaders to be willing to do the same, to not think so highly of yourself that your time is too valuable for anybody else, but to be a human, to have a conversation. I can promise you this: the more you're willing to have conversations with an absolute stranger, the more time you're willing to give to people that you might otherwise think are not worthy of your time, the more time you're willing to love on an absolute stranger and listen to their ideas, the more you're going to learn. And not only will you learn more about them specifically, but you'll learn more about the world that they live in, the things that they put up with, what they're going through. And every one of those learning opportunities will make you a better leader. You hear leaders all the time say, well, I have an open door policy. Well, that's great that you have an open door policy. The question is, when somebody walks through that door, do you treat them with the dignity of being a human being? Do you have a conversation with them, or do you give them dictates because you're the leader, you're in charge, those are your ideas and everybody should follow them? See, those are two totally different things. I want to remind you that those conversations for different rooms or for different times. This summer, I'll be launching 2 new shows. I don't know if you know this, if you're watchers of Leading Leaders podcast, this is the only one that I very seldom have interviews on. I don't think Leading Leaders podcast has ever had interviews or conversations with other people. It's just a teaching show. But Story Power TV, that's a conversation with a specific vein of content. And on those shows, we've had couples, we've had pairs, we've had partners, we've had all kinds of relationships. There's also Transforming Grace TV, and I only do that show with my wife because we interview couples who are struggling with addiction, looking for answers for others to apply. I also have a new show launching. We've got about 6 of them in the can and more coming, called Lead the Narrative, where we specifically interview people who are leading the conversation in other places in different realms, some of whom I don't even agree with, but they're effective at leading the narrative. And their voice needs to be heard, and their strategies need to be explored. And then finally, for this new network, I'll be launching a program called Lead the Day. Whole different format, different conversation, different audience. And it's like walking into a different room. Each of these shows has its own audience. Each of these conversations is with a specific group of people for the benefit of a different specific group of people. But being a conversationalist means listening more than you talk, engaging people with genuine curiosity, asking the questions that perhaps others wouldn't ask, and looking for answers that maybe they haven't shared with everybody, but they're worthwhile answers. And there's a lot of learning to be found in them. I want to challenge you to do a similar thing. Every audience that you're in front of, every group of people that you speak to, every person you have a conversation with, be a brilliant conversationalist. Do that by being genuinely curious about them. Curiosity over control of the conversation will go a whole lot further. Lead them by asking honest questions and giving them plenty of time to talk. Maybe just listen more than you talk. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.
master teacher on storytelling, and I learned so much. I'm really going to have to sit down and go back through everything, and I think I might have to have some more coffees with Loren, but it was totally worth my time, and I really highly recommend it if you're looking to grow your ministry, grow your business, grow your career. Loren will serve you well.
Thank you.